All right, good afternoon and good evening, everybody. It is uh, Monday, April 8th, 2024. This is the meeting of the Electrification Action Team for CCL. And this is the first of our series of 6 workshops on engagement and outreach and coalition building for building electrification in our communities and states. And we have 18 here now. We have 40 or 50 RSVPs, so I'll give a minute or two for people to trickle in. While we do that, I'd encourage everybody to please just introduce yourself in the chat. We won't have time for everybody to do it verbally, but tell us who you are, where you're from, your CCL chapter maybe. And if you are already engaging with other community groups or with your city council or your state legislature, mention that in the chat too. We'd love to hear it.
Hi, shall I start introducing myself?
No, thank you. You can introduce yourself in the chat, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gehendra. All right, well, we're a minute into the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. I expect we'll see a few more. We have 25. So, pardon me. Again, welcome everybody. My name is Pete Marsh. I'm one of the 4 co-leads of the Electrification Action Team. My partners in crime are here with us, Michael Metzner, Mark Friedman, and Jay Bassett. And each of us will be presenting a piece of this, so you'll hear their lovely voices later, better than mine. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. I'll share my screen and our slide deck, and we'll get going. And but we want to make this engaging, so feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll have plenty of pauses for questions as we go along. So folks should be able to see a slide deck on screen now, title slide, engagement outreach. Can I get a yes from somebody?
Yes.
All right, beautiful, thank you. So this is, hello? So,
I can hear.
okay, great. So good afternoon again, everybody. This is workshop number 1 of a series of 6 workshops, and today we'll be talking an introduction to community engagement and coalition building. And we have, if it's possible to have a step-by-step cookie-cutter approach to building coalitions, we found one online. You can find anything. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has one, and it gives a lot of good reminders about things to keep in mind, and we'll be talking through that. So first off, we're reaching out both to chapters and other action teams. There's a ton of interest in CCL in the electrification policy pillar and how to engage. So first off, here's an overview of what we have today. We'll talk about briefly about what is building electrification, what to ask of local leaders, how to go about building a coalition, or stopping short of that, just engaging and working with other NGOs in your community, and then dump a little bit into a presentation template for briefing community leaders. Here is sort of an overview of the groups that you might be working with as you're pursuing building electrification policies. Hello? I thought I heard. Okay. So you might find yourself talking to your city council, a county board of supervisors, a housing authority, air pollution control district, or a school district. And we're going to be asking them to look at electrification, which is decarbonization policies, both for new construction, for retrofits, for municipal buildings, really for everybody. And really, there's a handful of policy types. Can I ask one of the co-leads? I'm getting some other noise. Can somebody mute everybody? Mark, can you perhaps mute?
Yeah, I'm
I'm doing it
looking
all.
how to do that.
Yeah. Okay, and I think I muted everyone but myself. Okay, so the types of policies that we might want to be asking about are starting with the second one, all electric building codes or electric preferred or building performance standards or zero emission appliance standards. There's a lot of ways to accomplish the same goal, which is zero emissions and combustion happening inside our dwelling units and our places of work. And so those vary around the country, and there's different legal authorities that cities and counties and states can use. We'll be talking about that downstream in subsequent workshops. One of my favorite examples of a great coalition that's been underway for maybe 2 or 3 years now, and Mark Friedman is a member of this, and 4 of the CCL chapters in the San Diego area. There's nearly 40 nonprofits that have come together and formed this loose coalition called the San Diego Building Electrification Coalition. They're getting meetings with city councils, with school districts, county supervisors, and making progress on building electrification policy. And Mark will talk about that a little bit more in detail later on. So this is one of the sort of upper end of the range. Another example of local outreach is, holding an electrification fair. A number of CCL chapters have already done this. And now here is the overview of the series that we're going to go through over the next 3 months. Today's workshop I've already described. 2 weeks from now, we'll walk through our resource toolkit, which is essentially a list of resources that we've assembled in a Google Drive folder and workspace that we've made most of it publicly available to anyone on the internet. There's a small part that's reserved for members with a password, but it's essentially a curated list of resources out there. We're not going to create yet another technical guide on how to install a heat pump or anything like that, but we've gone through some of the respected nonprofits and think tanks out there and found what they're doing. Our third workshop is a fun one. We get to hear what youth are bringing to the table. And so CCL's National Youth Action Team is just finishing up the first year and starting the second year of their Great School Electrification Challenge. And we'll learn about that and how they're getting youth involved and becoming inspired and motivated by the youth and bringing action to school districts around the country. Workshop 4, we'll talk through structured decision making. It's that's a structured sounding term, but it's actually a great facilitated process and facilitation process for how do we as advocates and as volunteers come together, decide what our priorities are, what actions we're going to take, and make plans. And one of Jay's connections at Georgia Tech University, Dr. Ruthie Yao, is going to lead us through a great example of how to facilitate that. Then the next workshop will be, okay, you've decided what your community group wants to do. Now, how do you make the connections within your community? There's a tool called power mapping, which is well known among activist and organizer groups, which during which you again get a bunch of collaborators together and identify who are the decision makers that are important to what we want to accomplish, and how are we going to persuade them? And if we don't know them, how do we get connected and get a warm introduction and that kind of thing? And then finally, towards the end of June, we'll have a workshop on building coalitions in the real world. And we'll have a group of panelists talking about different approaches. So with that, I will pause for a second. We can open it up for a couple of questions, and then we'll dive a little bit into the step-by-step coalition building approach. I'm going to unshare the screen so that we can see if there's any questions. Any hands raised, or from other co-leads, any comments in the chat that we should be looking at? Dan. You're still muted, Dan. Dan, you're muted.
This is saying, Pete, looks mostly like introductions in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Hey,
It seems like
Pete?
most of the emphasis is on identifying organizations that we can collaborate with, but I don't see a lot about the utilities. And I guess in my experience, the holdup is the utilities, because they don't want us to put in more electric than our house is wired for.
Yeah, good point, Dan. In this particular series of workshops, we don't have a plan to dive deep into that one. It's a good topic, but we're working more in this series on how to work with our community-based organization partners to affect change. But as a coalition in one region identifies during power mapping, for instance, who they need to approach for decision making, utility may very well be one of the most important players to approach.
Hey, Pete, I'd like to add a little bit to this, because this question came up at the Southeast Conference as well. And part of what we're trying to do is it's not about one approach to impact utilities. We're trying to build bottom-up advocacy through local communities, working with local governments, but we can also bring in state elected and county officials into that conversation as you're working top-down through the PSCs and utilities. So it's a way of being strategic, of doing bottom-up organizing to push top-down, and then we're aligning with federal funding to kind of make that happen. So that's the part of the secret sauce we're trying to suggest.
Great, thank you. Okay, then, pardon me, I'll go ahead and share screen again, and then hand it off to our next presenter to start into the coalition building piece. And oops, there we go. Michael.
Yeah, that would be me. Hello, everybody. Good to be here. Good to be here with everybody. So the whole issue of coalitions and, why? What are they? Why bother, kind of thing. Well, let's start by asking what a coalition is. And coalition is simply a network of organizations that work together to achieve a greater goal, or a common goal, if you will, or common goals. But why bother forming one in the first place? Well, really, and maybe this is preaching to the choir at this point, but done right, a coalition is more powerful than the collective individual efforts of its members. For one, when individuals and organizations coordinate, they broaden and deepen their reach. They reach more people and they reach deeper into those populations. They deliver more consistent and targeted messaging. They leverage their individual networks and brands for the good of the coalition. A coalition letter, for example, with many different organizations signed on, shows strength in numbers. A diverse coalition of many voices can speak to many audiences, obviously the way that no one organization can on its own. And a coalition provides a forum for discussing ideas, exchanging news, and celebrating successes. So simply put, forming or joining coalitions are essential to create the change we're seeking. And that's why we're dedicating this workshop to the series of workshops, the idea of coalition building. Can you turn the slide, Pete? So and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this, but while forming coalitions in principle is great, it's important to look and listen before you leave. For one, you need to get the lay of the land. Are there coalitions of environmental groups or housing groups or others in your area that are already working on electrification? If so, a good thing to do is to start attending those meetings of those groups. There may already be a coalition around you working on electrification, even if it doesn't call itself that. So attend the meetings, introduce yourself, CCL and our policy priorities and the logic behind our policy priorities. Determine whether you can align with or join an existing group, or do you need to start a new one? And then next slide. So once you decide, if the answer is you need to engage and form a coalition with the various activities that are going on around you, once you decide to do that, we offer this 8-step process, which was adapted from, as Pete had mentioned earlier, from the Electronic Frontier Alliance. So I'm going to hand the reins to Mark, who's done a lot of work on this, to briefly walk through these 8 steps.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'll cover the first half of them, and then I think Jay will continue with those. So again, this is, as Mike said, this is in the situation where there is not an existing coalition in your area. So after you've determined, I've looked around, I really want to focus on, I think I really want to focus on some area, and there's no one else who's really doing it, or I can't find any group that's compatible. So it's more work, but kind of creating your own coalition. The first step is selecting a leader, and the leader is going to set the entire tone and culture for your group. They'll be the one to help formulate the purpose of the group. They will call the meetings. They will work with their team to organize any campaigns and activities, and who to contact, when to outreach, and call together the regular meetings which are required. They're going to also kind of set the culture of the group, whether it's going to be largely leadership making the decisions on which direction that coalition's going to go. Are they going to stay really focused, or are they going to over time broaden their activities, and are they going to be very proactive, or are they going to be more kind of passive in terms of waiting for opportunities to come to them? So selecting the leader is really important. And I can tell you in San Diego Building Electrification Coalition, the leader of that organization does all these things. They're very, very proactive. They're constantly out in the community. They're setting the tones. They're setting the agenda for the meetings. And it's one approach that's proven, I think, pretty effective in San Diego area. So next slide, Pete. So once once you have the leader and maybe a few core members, establish the building electrification objectives. So it's recommended to keep them simple, only limit it to 1 to 3 different points. Simpler is better, easy to understand, simple statements. Not, like CCL is always practiced, not controversial, stay, broader. And some examples would be, we want all buildings electrified in our city. I mean, just a simple statement like that. We want to have all, a subset of that might be an objective, all new building construction. We want legislation passed in our area of all new construction should be electrified. Or maybe it's more focused in one area, in a particular area. We're gonna, the purpose of our group and our objectives are to get all the schools in our area electrified. Schools are a bit different. We'll go into that a little bit more in the third workshop, but you know, that's a whole different organization and that manages schools and school districts, and they have their own budget. They have a lot more control in some ways than city councils or county boards of supervisors. We may want to have an objective to say our goal is to help low-income families in our area electrify their homes, and we're going to help raise funds to do that. Or maybe it's just some broad statement that says, we want to reduce carbon pollution by 50% in our county, right? And those, figuring out kind of what your purpose is and what you're want to focus on will lead you down the path to, who to reach out to and who to engage. So next slide. So that reaching out would start, recommended here, with a coalition letter. So it should be, it's again, focus, pretty simple, 2 or 3 paragraphs maybe. And it is, it basically becomes your pitch letter to others, to getting others to sign on to your coalition. So maybe you and a few other folks draft this letter up. It's a statement of what you want your coalition to be about, what summarizes those objectives that we just talked about. And then you would use that to get a few other groups signed on. So this is kind of your quiet period, going around to other possible coalition members, ones that you've identified and targeted. And you would probably send them this letter via email, follow up with a phone call, explain to them why you think they may be a good fit, explore that, see if they are. In the email that you send, you may want to include a link. So you would also, in parallel with creating this letter, probably create a simple, your first website, and then include a link to your website, so that when people receive an email, that usually the first thing they do is say, "So what's their website say?" So link back to that. And then after you get on a phone call with them, talk about all the great things that you think your emerging coalition and their organization could accomplish together, and see if that's a good fit. If not, thank them for their time, and move on to the next possibility. Next slide, please. Yeah, and as Michael mentioned, organizations appear coalitions of organizations appear stronger than just groups of individuals. They are able to get more attention. I know that, as Pete mentioned, there's 40 members of San Diego Building Electrification Coalition. It's pretty focused. It's like one of the only organizations in San Diego that's purely focused on building electrification. Having, 40 logos that you can put on a letter to a city council or to the board of supervisors gets a lot of attention. We're able to get meetings with city council members. We're able to get one-on-one meetings with program managers. In San Diego, we've gotten the climate table that's been established that it has worked toward submitting their climate pollution reduction grant. They just submitted, $200 million application for a $200 million grant because of partially because of the work of the San Diego Building Electrification Coalition. $83 million of that is for building electrification programs. So getting those groups together really does offer the opportunity for a lot more power. However, you may want to also have individual thought leaders. When you recognize folks who are, can bring additional constituencies in, and you may want to have a different membership structure and different positions for those individuals than for groups. But that's something to think through. But when you are, and I'll just wrap up here, when you're looking at signing up other organizations, check to make sure you're strategically aligned. Probably the most important thing you can think about in having those conversations. Make sure that they really have interest in building electrification, that they're not just kind of generalized environmental organizations that may be focused on, animal welfare or ocean restorations or forest conservation. If they really don't have interest or stated objectives that relate to building electrification, then you may find that organizations being pulled in multiple directions or different direction than the coalition that you're trying to establish with the objectives you created. So I'll now transition it over to Jay.
So as we talk about this, Mark, I'm going to brag on you for a minute, because there's one piece of the San Diego coalition, because it's in the chat a little bit from Greg and another comment about climate action plans. And for San Diego, and Mark, you can tell me if I got this wrong, but part of the coalition was to actually work with the city to submit a climate pollution reduction implementation grant, which had a significant amount of money for building efficiency and electrification, if I remember right, as part of that grant. So there are some real outcomes that come out of these coalitions.
That is correct. It's actually the county and 18 cities in the San Diego metro.
Right. So I just want to recognize that, because it was in some of it was in the chat. So for my piece, and I want to talk a little bit more about the tactics, because I've built a number of these coalitions. So one of the things, I just want to set a little bit of context as we talk about get sign up. So one of the ones I worked on was as part of the CCL chapter in Gwinnett, was what we call Gwinnett Solarize, where we brought together 3 or 4 other entities like Sierra Club, Sustainable Gwinnett, to do a solar RFP for bulk buy for solar, to provide it at discounted prices. And then as part of that, we set up a system for the renewable energy credits to be donated to a local community nonprofit working on low-income housing on building electrification. So that was really just 6 people coming together around that shared interest or that strategic direction. And then we reached out to bring a vendor to work with us on an RFP. So, these things don't have to be very big. It was, I think the other was on the signups was Portland, where they were just working on a place-based thing for an electrification fair as a way of doing community outreach. So, when you talk about signups, it could be, as Mark said, where you're working in a complex governance with 40 community organizations to yank, 70 million worth of potential funding. But it could also be something where you're just coming together with others to do an electrification fair, or maybe you do a Solarize campaign. So, as you look at who to reach out to, who to bring on that shared interest, just keep in mind that you can decide how big or how small you want to make it as you bring people into the table. On the signups, what I have found is the most difficult piece of this has been that, people get hesitant to just calling the call and just bringing people together. So in the coalitions I built, we saw an opportunity, we saw a shared interest. We said, hey, some of us had connections to different entities. So he said, we just called it together and said, hey, do we want to work on this? And just pulled in and said, what does everyone think? And can we move forward with it? And then we built some structure around that, right? In terms of who else to bring to the table, who were, kind of the decision makers with each organization. So again, like with the Solarize campaign, we had to decide who was going to work on the RFP. On the RFP, who was going to be the one that interviews the contractors, who would help make the selection, and then how we market it out to the community, right? And these were all different pieces of decision makers from different organizations, of which CCL was part of, that kind of do that. So, it is about doing not the list of possible organizations, but how do you want to structure it based upon that strategic vision or that strategic mission, place-based event, and or a campaign or something more you want to do. The last thing I wanted to say on this on signups, it may be where CCL is signing up with someone else. So it may not be you signing up, but you may be looking around to say, hey, for example, in Georgia, there's the Georgia Alliance for Climate and Energy, GACE, and the Georgia Environmental Coalition, which is working on statewide policy and legislative initiatives around climate, of which electrification and building electrification is part of that, where CCL is a member of that, and we found that strategic interest, but we weren't the ones convening it. It was being convened by another group. So in essence, it kind of got reversed. They signed us up, and then we are participating in that statewide coalition and bringing that back down to the chapters. So I just want to give you a couple of ideas as you look at sign up and organization. It can be really varied. The other thing I want to do is talk about how do you announce your coalition? And, some of that depends upon what you're going to do. So if you're going to run an electrification fair, then you're going to want to, push out and do the outreach and marketing to say, here's who's all involved, here's why we're involved, and here's the event we're going to hold. If it's like with what Mark is doing with San Diego, it's about whether it's CCL as part of it or as CCL as a convener. It's also bringing, again, how do you announce that so that you can come in and work with decision makers at the city level that you want to influence on policy, or in this case, on climate action plan input and climate pollution reduction implementation grant projects, and be able to, build that governance piece, which might be things like a website, might include some press releases to say, this is what we're about. We met with these city officials to do these things. Here were the outcomes, and be really positive about it, about the good things that came out of it. There was another coalition I was part of where we were actually working with the Sustainability Commission to work on hiring a sustainability director. And it was CCL that was the go-between between the county administrator and the Sustainability Commission to get a recommendation to hire a sustainability coordinator. And so we were part of making sure that was out there in the public view with a positive thumbs up, and that it became a win-win for a political vote. Go to the next. So communication is probably the most difficult piece as we talk about doing this. So, absolutely you want to have a mailing list and listserv, but you also want to, what we call develop a rhythm for how you want to meet to do the things that you've agreed to do. And one of the first things you want to do when they say clear rules is rules for engagement and meeting, not only how often and what you're going to do and the tactics, but also things like, what is the strategy that you're going to do? Which are the different political pull and entities different people bring, right? So, the example again on one of them I was part of is where us and the Sierra Club came in and we had different roles for a meeting so that we could be persuasive to say, hey, you need to add that to the budget, or you need to do this policy change as well. So it is about meeting, but it's also about how to find clear roles and rules for who's going to do what to meet the outcomes and strategies that you're building together with the other individuals or the other entities you're working with. And then the other part is it send emails, but really means is that, how do you communicate so that everyone knows what they got to do when we're going to do it. And if we're doing campaigns, say the Solarize campaign, who's doing what outreach to the community to, to go through that marketing campaign to be able to meet the end goals, which in our case was how can we sign up as many kilowatt hours of new users as we can by the end of the campaign. And as part of that campaign, we actually did, for example, demonstrations of people that put on solar on their roofs, where we brought out elected state and local officials to be part of how this plays, so they can see what it is we're doing in a real way.
Wow.
So those are just a couple of ways of thinking about communications and updates. The last thing I would tell you is we did that is be respectful of boundaries, knowing that, for example, we knew that for the work we're doing on the sustainability director, that the county administrator couldn't go directly to the sustainability commission because it would go around the elected official. So we were that intermediary to be able to talk to the commission to get the recommendation that he can then put in the budget that gave the elected official something to give a vote up on. So it's really being strategic and understanding who can do what and what the lanes are as you drive and work with your coalition. So regular calls is part of this. I do agree, and I want to say that we never, in the coalitions I've been part of, we've never, outside of doing things like part of what we're actually doing. So when we did, say, a request for proposals for vendors, and we were interviewing vendors, that was an activity that took multiple hours, right? But our meetings, and we did weekly meetings, were never more than 1 hour. And we kept them really short and pithy. And if we ended early, that was fine. And then we also kept a list of, here's the things we've all committed to do, so that when we got together next time, whether it was a 1 week and we set up weekly calls, doesn't have to be that often. The Georgia Alliance for Climate I mentioned have monthly calls, so that you're tracking the things that everyone ought to be doing when you come together. So there is about accountability and responsibility for both us as CCL members, as CCL as an organization, as well as other organizations or individuals. So we're all holding each other accountable so that we can advance forward, right? And be able to meet the things we're trying to do, those outcomes. So conference calls, meetings, we did face-to-face meetings as well. We did strategy meetings. So these are all different things, but the key is regular meetings, holding each other accountable, always bringing strategy back to the table, always talking about consensus for decision making, and always talking about and being really conscious that we're working toward and we're part of a shared set of values in the strategies we're doing, and we're building trust in our relationship as we go to be able to do those great things that Mark mentioned in San Diego, that you can actually put together a project with a city for $70 million, right? And that takes trust with other individuals and accountability. So anyway, you can go to the next one.
Okay. And I can take it
So-
on in from here if you like. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to go and turn it back over to you, Pete, and say, I know you were going to go a little bit deeper in the Google Drive, point out some of the resources we have, and a few more things. So I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah. And I'm not going to take the time to do that right now. We're a little bit over our budget. So, but this is essentially, Google Drive is where we're keeping that repository I talked about. That's a resource toolkit and a variety of things for us all to look at. So just a couple more things to close out. I dropped into the chat. I was excited to see people talking about what they're already doing. And that's one of the huge things we learned. We held a pilot series of workshops. We boiled down this series of 6 into just 3 workshops, and worked with about a half a dozen chapters around the country who are already engaging. And we learned a ton from them, perhaps as much as or more than they learned from us. So this best practices, or if you tried something that didn't go as well as you like, maybe that's tales from the trenches. But we'd love to hear what you've done in your region or community and how it worked. And so you can, let's see, I'm going to move this in case it's blocking the toolbar, but almost every slide that we ever present will have one or several links at the bottom, either to authoritative resources, or in this case, you can see links to our Google slide deck, our folder, our Google Doc, and you can tell us about what you've got going on in your own coalition or community or outreach via any of those. We just like to hear about it and share the word. CCLers love to help each other, and that's going to be a huge part of this. So just like Snoopy over here, toot your own horn. And if during these workshops you hear another chapter or person talking about something, remember to go to CCL Community. You can go to Connect, find a member, and look up people by their name, and it's pretty easy. The other thing is, we'll be doing these workshops twice a month. Generally, the pattern is the second and fourth Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, like tonight. But the fourth and fifth workshops are going to be slightly out of sync because of the Memorial Day holiday and the June CCL conference, and that's shown on the calendar. But during the Mondays when we're not holding workshops, we're just going to hold electrified office hours. Lightning goes better with coffee. So come and join us, and we'll talk about what's going on, answer questions, help each other, that kind of thing. So with that, I'll stop share, and the rest of the hour, we've got 18 minutes left, and we can just, take questions, suggestions, that kind of thing.
There's a few questions in the chat, Pete.
Okay. Fantastic. If you have visibility on a couple of them, Mark, go ahead, because I'm out of sync.
So one question, I'm getting back to it. So Sylvia was asking, what do we see as the connections between this type of network and the climate action plan in your area? And I mean, I can start in our area and anybody else add in, and anybody in there, any of the people's listening in. So in our area, they align pretty well. The pursuit of the climate production reduction grants was based on the work that had been done in the climate action plan in our area. So I know that the county, or the group in the county that led this program, drew upon the data, a lot of the data that they've been working to develop in the climate action plan. So I think they're very complementary and reinforce each other.
Yeah, Mark, and I just want to add, I put in the chat so folks know that a couple things. One is on March the 11th, EPA put out a climate pollution reduction press release that kind of talks about the state and metro area climate action plans. And there's actually a link to every action plan that's been submitted. I mean, every climate action plan, priority climate action plan. So everyone here in your local community can see which action plan that you fit underneath, whether it's a statewide one or a metropolitan area-wide one, and look and see if any of those priorities around building electrification is already in that plan. Because if it is, then you could be working with your local government on the next round of climate pollution implementation grants, which will probably be coming out in the fall. So the first round closed April the 1st, Mark. That's the one San Diego applied to. There'll be a second round in the fall. So it's not too late to engage on that. And then the second thing, that's a priority climate action plan. In 2025, there's a requirement, there'll be a final climate action plan. So between the priority one, which is like a draft, and that final one, you can also be part of working with others in a coalition to influence your local governments that may be working on the final climate action plan or the state level to be able to include those priorities as well. Because it'd be a wonderful thing if we have 45 to 50 states with a climate action plan and 70 municipal large metro areas. There's a lot we can do with that. So anyway, that's the update in response to the question I wanted to put out, and I put it in the chat.
So Tracy asks, how do you build funding for the website, marketing, and other expenses? So my first answer, I think there's a lot of different ways to approach this. I mean, I have a background in technology, and a lot of the organizations that I see around have technical or marketing members who are volunteers. There's a lot you can do for free. So, I mean, Google Sites offers free websites with templates and everything. So it's pretty easy to create something like that. The marketing, the other part of the question, the marketing and other expenses, these are going to be volunteer organizations. And their main focus is going to be on outreach to, local legislative bodies, or other organizations. I think it's going to be a lot of grassroots marketing, a lot of outreach in emails. So I don't think the marketing and other expenses are going to be very high unless you're really trying to do something broad-based in your community, not focused on passing legislation. But if you do need funding, I always ask Jay.
So there's a number of ways to look at it. In all the coalitions I've been part of, there's always some community, other organizations that have some capacity to do that. So it isn't like you have to own that, right? It's people do that because you're meeting their shared interest under their vision and their mission. So it's about alignment and then sharing of resources. And what CCL brings is the ability to do deeper inreach and bring the network to bear on and bring in the tools they have for doing the engagement with lobbying for both federal, state, and local officials, and take the area that we're strong in and push that thing forward. But I have yet to find anyone in that, CCL had to take it out of their hide to do that. It became a shared interest to be able to do that. For the Solarize campaign was a little bit different because we actually brought a vendor to help run the campaign that was making money from putting solar on the roof. So they did the marketing for us, right? And we were part of developing what that marketing would be. So there are many ways to crack this egg beyond just go find a university and a college student and, start your own website.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, what I'd like to do is take a minute and call out a handful of folks who have introduced in the chat things that they're doing, engaging with community already. And so those of you who have made the mistake of fessing up probably already know who I'm going to be calling on, but I'll list a few names and then give you a minute to prepare. So Alex Eminette up in Montana, engaging with chambers of commerce. Bob Mayo in Silicon Valley. Let's see. I knew I had a couple other. Linda Kingery in Bemidji, Minnesota, working with a rural electric co-op. Ben in Grand Valley, working on community and utility scale solar. So don't feel obligated, but I wanted to emphasize the fact that this is already happening, and in many ways, we're not telling you anything new or magic, and let's share with each other what's working. Any of those folks or others feel like stepping up and giving us a half a minute or a minute on what's going on?
Sure, I'll jump into this hot boiling pot. Hello, this is Alex in Montana. And what we're trying to do here is reach out to chambers of commerce with an invitation to partner with Citizens Climate Lobby, not saying to them, you have to join Citizens Climate Lobby, but hello, we're really interested in helping you with your, for example, Billings Chamber of Commerce. Build on your already great LEED certification in the city and get more buildings electrified. And so we have an electrification action team and we have experts. You can join us for an Ask Me Anything session, for example. That's what we're trying to do. And I'm working on trying to get that meeting in place right now.
Beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else?
Sure. This is Bob Mayo from Silicon Valley. We're fortunate in that we have a large number of grassroots organizations, and we have several very active professional organizations that are driving electrification, and they have money and full-time staff. In particular, our local community power companies, Silicon Valley Clean Energy and Peninsula Clean Energy, do a lot of heavy market transformation work. Advocates in our area pretty much do their own thing, but there are two coalitions where people from various organizations show up at. There's probably more than two, but Fossil Free Buildings Silicon Valley is one, and the other is Climate Action Leadership Team, which is a place where organizations meet, some individuals, mostly organizations, and the Sierra Club loosely hosts it, but it pretty much runs on its own. I'd say mostly it's herding cats. A lot of the very active climate advocates are members of 3 or 4 organizations, and while they attend some of these coalitions, there's a lot of just sort of, talking back and forth. So that's sort of how things are here.
Yeah, great, Bob. I'm going to amplify that a little bit. One of the other CCL chapters, Michael Metzner's in Marin County, California, has a very similar thing going on, and we've nicknamed that sort of the federated approach. There's already a bunch of great groups doing things. They're generally aligned. There is no formal coalition or mutual governance or anything, but they're keeping each other informed, and there's this mutual respect and collaboration that way, and that's fine. Let me see what. Who else? Anybody else want to share a little bit about what's going on?
What about Colin from Quit Carbon? Is he still on?
Yep.
More about that.
Yeah, I'm on. Sorry, my video isn't working right now, but yeah, we, really excited to be here. We are a small, mission-driven for-profit startup that serves California and helps with home electrification initiatives. And so we've been really involved in all kinds of different collaborations with nonprofits, as well as, cities and utilities and, everyone we can think to work with on this issue, because it is a very, challenging problem to solve. And so, yeah, we've done everything from, we've got cities now that are paying us to do outreach in their areas, like City of San Jose and City of Santa Monica are paying us to basically reach out and engage homeowners in home electrification through our service, which is a free concierge service. And then we're doing a lot of work with nonprofits. I posted in the chat as well, there are a few other companies that are doing similar things as Quit Carbon in various areas. So I have that link in there for, for coalition building. We try to keep a running list of everyone doing similar types of things, and that may be a good place. So yeah, if anyone has, if anyone's in California, definitely check out our plan. And if anyone wants to, chat more, this is really what we do for our daily thing. We've done a lot of research on motivations and messaging around, decarbonization, specifically for homes. And I'm very happy to collaborate however we can.
Yeah. Thanks, Colin. And I'll amplify that a little bit also. I met Colin's founder, a guy named Marcus Cooper, at a USGBC conference a year ago. And they categorize themselves as an electrification concierge. And so they're there to help assess what your house needs, and help you find contractors to do it and find incentives to pay for it. And there's a variety of other nonprofits that are trying to set up programs to do similar things. The building decarbonization. What's that?
I was gonna say South Face Institute, for example.
Okay, go ahead and describe them.
They're in Atlanta, but they represent the whole Southeast on building electrification and building efficiency. And they were also awarded a America's Renewed Nonprofit Grant for doing electrification for nonprofits throughout the Southeast, right? So that's an example of an entity that's working at least in the Southeast, Pete, is what I was gonna say.
Nice,
What
thank
was
you.
the name again? What was
South
the name
Face-
again?
South Face Institute.
So the opposite of the outdoor clothing company, which is North Face, right?
Yeah.
So
James Marlowe is their CEO. Good guy.
okay, so a couple of other nonprofits working on this: the Building Decarbonization Coalition, which is based in California but starting to branch out into other states. They have a program called Ambassadors, which is volunteers. And I think Bob Mayo and I, at least, are both members of that group. And it's people who will go out to community events and do tabling, or get involved even one-on-one with homeowners. And then the Rewiring America is starting a program called Electrification Coaches. And several of us are going through that. It's a month-long program with 4 90-minute in-person meetings and some homework and that kind of thing. And while I'm mentioning Rewiring America, they have formed what might be the godfather of all coalitions. Many of us may have seen late last week, the announcement came out from EPA that they awarded $20 billion of greenhouse gas reduction fund funding from the IRA. And that went to 8 collaborative organizations around the country. Rewiring America formed one of those groups. It's called Power Forward. And I think Rewiring did a fair bit of the heavy lifting to bring that coalition together. But they got the United Way, which has already existing organization in thousands of communities around the country. They've got Habitat for Humanity and 300 plus other partners in that group. And then the other organizations that are forming these coalitions are similar. And each of these 8 are going to be essentially a green bank, and they'll have $1 to a few $billion each. And they'll be funneling money out through an existing network of like 1,200 community development finance institutions. And we'll be hearing more about that in subsequent workshops. But that's going to give a big boost.
Yeah, Pete, I just want to clarify. The federal funding is $2 billion each. The Power Forward Communities is bringing $100 billion of private equity with them, so it's $102 billion. And the Opportunity Finance Network for the CDFIs is bringing $40 billion plus 2. So do the math. That's a hell of a lot of money coming down to communities to invest in building electrification, affordable housing, and those types of things. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, we're near the top of the hour and the end of the hour. I want to mention briefly a quick look ahead to April 22nd, 2 weeks from now. We'll be doing our second workshop. That'll be a little deeper dive into the resource toolkit. And specifically, we have 5 different sections that we'll be talking about: sources of funding, like we just covered briefly, presentation template that you can modify to talk to your city councils, etc., model reach codes, municipal ordinances, and school district resolutions and policies. So with that, we're done with our presentation and workshop. We're all happy to hang out for a little while and continue chatting, answering questions. But thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right. And Bob Mayo wrote billion ? Exclamation point. And yes.
Yeah, just so you know, Pete, I've been watching this for the last year. And when you add that with the climate pollution, the climate action plans, they are absolutely connected along with the implementation grants. And then the last one that's connected, which we might hear about more at the national conference, are the EJ grants, the 3 billions for community capacity building to access some of this funding. So they're all connected together.
Thank you very much.
Hey, you're very welcome. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you, everyone. I look forward to the next meeting.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tracy. All right. With that, I will go ahead and stop the recording.